makes the whole thing very complex, in fact. And if you don't test all these things, whether you have the best recovery solution or not, ultimately, if it does not really work when something goes wrong, it is still or should cloud-native models really make my disaster recovery better or not? So number one, if you look at it, of course, it makes the whole thing pretty cost pretty lower. But how? Because like I said, there's a pay-as-you-go model that you're getting, or the just-in-time capability for provisioning your workload resources, low storage costs. So all these things means that you have smaller budgets to look at for your your critical workloads. That means you can also now look at, within the same budget, you can look at giving more coverage, right? And what you have in a public cloud-based model is that guaranteed availability. I'm sure that the aspect of some of the aspects are already taken care of, like we discussed in the beginning, saying that most of the disasters are caused by I'm talking about the regular ones, because of UPS failures, or because of any other power failures or equipment failures. These kind of things are anyway masked and taken away from us in a public cloud scenario. So that is inherently, it is going to give you a much better availability. Public cloud, or most of the cloud environment, is something which is going to enable you to build your modern architectures, distributed, loosely coupled, or serverless, or PaaS heavy architectures that you can build. Another thing is that with all these things moving on to cloud, you can also look at applying some chaos engineering techniques, or looking at whether you can run your game days, and the way one of the cloud providers talks about. So you can run off all those kind of things, and you can increase your confidence in terms of running your disaster recovery. So that is another area that public cloud in fact provides us with that ability for building modern architectures and running all these chaos engineering techniques to see whether you're actually really good or not, right? And the fourth aspect that we spoke about, that you can automate all these things to a very high degree. So the degree at which this can be automated is obviously much more than what you can do, whether it is in an on-prem or a traditional world, or in a co-hosted environment. And look at what all things we could automate, right? We can automate the setup, we can automate the tests and drills, we can automate the recovery. In certain cases, we can even go to extreme in such a way that you can even automate the failbacks. So largely, it enables you to focus on your app and data rather than looking at actually working on your disaster recovery solution or the underlying infrastructure. So this is a lot of savings, right? So that is why we say that using a cloud native model is the modern way of looking at disaster recovery. So with that, I would invite Shalaka. So before that, I think Bhaskar can introduce Shalaka. So Shalaka will take us through some of the experience that they have, in terms of how Microsoft has built their solutions, and various aspects that you can look at in the modern architectures. So all those things, Shalaka will be taking us through that one. Over to you, Bhaskar. You can introduce Shalaka.
Sure. Thanks, Benel. And let me.
Shalaka, you would like to share the screen? Shall I stop sharing?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Shalaka, you may have to share your screen. I've stopped sharing.
Shalaka, you're on mute if you're speaking.
Shalaka, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was speaking, but did you see my screen? Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet.
It's not yet come up, Shalaka.
Not yet it is. Okay. Yeah. No?
Yes.
Okay.
Now I think it's coming up. So thanks, Benel.
Yeah.
So let me now introduce Shalaka. She is going to take us through from where Benel has discussed about it. So just to introduce Shalaka. Shalaka Verma, Director at Partner Technology, Microsoft. Shalaka currently leads a team of global cloud solution architect, and in her current role, she drives technology adoption of Azure platform via industry-specific solutions built with partners. In her extensive career across research, development, and technical sales, she has delivered several first of its kind wins for AI platform, database platform, hybrid cloud, and always-on architecture. She is well conversant in quantum computing and was chosen to be the first quantum ambassador for IBM in the ISA region. And thanks, Shalaka, for giving your time for this roundtable. Over to you.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And thank you everyone for taking time out on a Friday evening. It's really appreciating. I'm just going to sort of spend a few minutes just to talk through on all that Benil said and how I see this happening from the perspective of Azure Cloud specifically, right? So there is this larger play of what can strike you as a disaster, and I think he did touch upon multiple factors there, including the cyber attack. But I'm just going to start small and say, here is your VM that can basically fail. It can now go to your data center and you may say, my networking can fail. I mean, the VM is running fine, but I can't connect to it. My networking can fail. My rack power can go away. It can go a bit deeper into this and it will say, what if my whole data center fails? What if power is not isolated here? And then it really expands into saying, what if really a disaster strikes to my site and I really lose everything out there, right? So this is your expanding scope of failures, I would say, in the way a disaster will strike you. This is purely from your app side, right? Where your logic is running. And then you have a similar synergy going on your data side. So now a disaster strikes you, your data may get lost, and it can be actually because of a failure or even accidental. I mean, one of the admin just decided to run a query which is folk person gaining access and trying to sort of manipulate some of the stuff in your data center, holding you for a ransom. And the fourth one is your inside threat. What if somebody from the inside decides to sort of sabotage your own organization's effort, right? Without really first going into the recovery scenarios, I'm just going to sort of spend some time on this rug admin part. And I think there are some security strategies that you as a company by default will want to adopt. And I'm just going to sort of leave you with 3 strategies that Microsoft uses, right, for our internal function, our internal IT, our internal work. And these 3 strategies are really verify always and intentionally. So no matter what you are, what machine you are accessing it from, what is your endpoint, you will always get verified via multi-factor authentication. That is a philosophy. Once you sort of start putting this kind of philosophical practices in place, I think it sort of pans across the entire organization. The second philosophy that we follow internally is to ensure that we will never allow access beyond what is required. So it is need to know and need authorize on need to know basis, right? So that is also again very important, and that really pushes you to have very strict role and authority definitions within your organization. I'm just trying to voice it out because this is not really a technical problem. It is a cultural and policy problem. And the third one is really assume breach. So always assume that whatever you are protecting against is going to get breached. And how are you going to fence that breach? What is your detection strategy? What is the amount of time within which you can survive if the breach is detected? And how do you fence the breach? If you have got this policy set up, I think you probably have a good hang of what you are going to do with this inside threat kind of situation. Right now, going back to our original track, so there are these multiple strategies, and you know what you could actually look at is for the first of all, what is the infrastructure availability that is coming to you out of box? Very important, right? Because this is where your entire failure gamut starts. No matter how what kind of DR strategies you have, you still don't want to be in a situation where probably you're calling DR every other day, right? So basically your base deployment has to be really robust and really reliable. That is what you strive for first and foremost. So building your VMs where you don't have single point of failures, you have redundant paths, your storages are premium, you have right red levels, all basic hygiene, right? That is not going away. It has to be there. Cloud provider is probably right now helping you make that call based on the investment and based on the SLA commitments that they will drive. So you are better poised to take that call, but the call is still yours, right? You have to choose storage, you have to choose a VM architecture, etc., etc. Now then you have got this hardware failure coming up, and for you to protect against that, the right approach is to probably think about availability sets, right? So basically you are saying within this particular data center or like a cloud provider, I'm going to put up maybe not one but two VMs, or I'm going to sort of look at N+1 architecture, right? For every 10 VMs, I'm going to deploy one strategy locally. So if a core fails, if a memory fails, if particular workload is going offline, I don't want to call a DR for that. I don't want to really fail over the whole site, right? For that small failure. So smaller the failure, more locally I would like to manage it. That is the philosophy, and hence your availability set is your first way to go. This also helps you in sort of minimizing your downtime for say scheduled maintenances, patch upgrades, right? Because you always have one additional VM, two additional VMs sitting there where you can temporarily fail over, upgrade, maintain, and come back, right? Now, cloud providers lot of times do take care of this naturally. So the moment you say, I am going to configure a VM and I need an availability set, this is what Azure will do for you in the backend. So all your Azure standard maintenance that happens on the hardware side, Azure will leverage availability set and make sure that your VM is always running, because they will move, upgrade, maintain, and get you back. But it just helps for you to have that clarity in mind that if you are deploying a availability set with a cloud provider, you have got this local availability built in. Then moving on to your power zone failure, right? So what happens if my data center goes down? And this is where your availability zone comes in the picture. Right now, I think from the hyperscaler providers, we are not in a situation, none of us, and I'm just speaking about others as well, but we don't really have availability zone established in India. But Azure should have availability zone in a central India location in next 4-5 months, right? Which basically means that you practically have an ERDR. For a central India deployment, you have an ERDR site where your latency is going to be very low. So you could afford to maybe do a afford to do maybe sync replication on storage, afford to run an application on one site and database on another site, afford to probably have 4 or 5 application containers running on 2 different sites but connecting to a data at a single location, right? All of that is because you now have availability of an availability zone, which sort of gives you very low latency across 2 data centers, but at the same time isolates the power source for both of them. And then your last one is really the regional recovery. What happens if disaster strikes locally, right? How can I do multi-region recovery? And Azure does have a true DR within India, right? So if you are running with a regulated industry where the data cannot really move out from the India boundaries for DR, you have a provision right now. You've got 3 sites, so basically you can have a true DR running from India on Azure, right? So that is how you should look at it. Again, the true DR is so there are some default Azure services, right? Where Microsoft will say, from platform perspective, these are my services, those will run on availability zones. These are my services that will be available for you on multi-region support. So if a region goes down, the service remains up. More like if you're consuming any APIs, etc., those are the guarantees that you will get. But if you're deploying your own workload, your own VM, this is a call that you will have to take as a customer. You will have to say, this workload, I really need to be up across availability zone. This is my workload that I need to be available across regional pairs. And then the actual deployment and management of that is something that cloud can sort of streamline, automate, help you with. But the decision on workload on how your availability continuum looks like is a call that you will still have to take. And there will be a cost implication, a business implication for all of that, right? So that is not going away, is the point that I was trying to make. Now, again, from the data loss perspective, I think your backup is your first choice, because this sort of gives you a point in time data, will protect you against the accidental loss, against the corruption, against the ransomware. All of that is taken care of really by backup, because or even if you have got this sync replication running, guess what? If your data is corrupted, or say a ransomware encrypts your data, it is going to impact all the replication chain. So you're really, the solid strategy that you have on these kind of attacks is to really go back in time to your good available backup copy and really start from there, right? So and that is why you really can't really forget the backup, because you have got near DR, because you have got a disaster recovery side built in, and so on and so forth. So those are really the points that I wanted to make here when I was sort of trying to think about what a cloud provider is doing for you to really create a true DR strategy or BCDR strategy. Now, just one slide on why I think Microsoft is nicely positioned on Azure platform is because, we do have this differentiated approach, like I talked through about, like you have availability sets, zones, regional availability, services availability, then a true backup strategy, all of these together. And if you integrate that with Azure AD, then you have got the 3 security strategy that I talked about available to you on the fly, right? So that is one differentiated approach for you on business continuity, which is like a comprehensive offering. The second big point is Microsoft does have a lot of compliance certifications. Globally, more than 200 plus compliance certifications, especially in India, the compliances that are mandated by MIT, mandated by RBI, the financial domain, all are compliant. And what that basically means is, if you are really running a compliant industry specific workload on cloud, lot of hooks to create the audit trail, the compliance. By the way, giving the compliance back to the regulator is really a customer's responsibility at the end of the day. But Microsoft can empower, the platform can empower you to create a lot of audit trails and show you that how some of their services already have the certifications of compliance. So if you're building on top of them, you are responsible for just showing your additional audit trails and compliances, and the base platform will give theirs, and that sort of streamlines your overall compliance need in that industry. the third point is really the simple configuration that we can bring on board. So once you have taken a decision on the strategy, I think the rest of the stuff is very, very easily orchestrated and automated on the cloud platform. And last but not the least, I think is your cost reduction, because you are really paying as you go, especially for your DR deployments. A point that Benil mentioned, and a point which sort of, I would say, rather than dropping the cost, you should really look at improving the coverage. That is the right strategy. So you bring more workloads in the fold of availability continuum than what you could have afforded previously. Now, while this captures everything that I talked to about, it still gives you some good perspective on how the SLAs look like, right? So if you are on a single VM in a single data center with premium drives, you get about 3 nines of availability. If you are deploying your VMs with availability sets, you go to about 99.95. If you do availability zone, you go to 4.9. And if you really do a multi-region, you are really thinking about cutting edge RPO and RTO. Depends on your latency, the application that you are using for application, etc. But we can work out the SLA for you, right? So, and similarly, you have all the listed numbers. I'll share the charts, listed numbers here on the storage durability side. Really, gives you more confidence on how your SLA parameters are going to look like, and your cloud provider is going to have that commitment on the table and skin in the game. So you are sort of sharing the responsibility with your provider on this. If you're already on this journey, like for example, if you have got a couple of deployments on cloud and you're really interested in looking at where you stand today and what you could incrementally do, there is this offer called as, or a service called as well-architected framework that you can start leveraging. It's well-documented approach on looking at your availability, scalability, and performance issues. And Microsoft can come up with very incremental steps that you could take on to improve each one of the pillars of your application architecture, right? So this is really from the platform side. But while I say all of this, I think, we are seeing this cloud native application architectures coming up, which are like always on, and something that I am very passionate about when people start building the application code. And there are multiple other approaches that you can now take in the architecture itself. If you're developing something grounds up, or even if you are sort of fragmenting an existing application into, say, microservices, you could look at all of these techniques. Like some of the techniques are really compensating transactions, right? Instead of failing, can I go back in time automatically within my application? This is a logical tier, right? Can I go back myself? Am I looking at isolating my application failure? So if a particular part of my application fails for whatever reason, the whole web app doesn't go down. It probably just starts showing a red in one of the smaller frame in that overall context of the thing, right? This is how the current architectures always on. If you have looked at maybe SBI, or ICICI banking app, right? Something goes wrong, only that part sort of gets deactivated, but you are hardly ever in a situation where I'm just not able to access the app, right? So that is how you sort of are able to manage. So that is bulkhead. Then you are sort of looking at this queue-based leveling. So suddenly a rush comes in, a workload comes into you. Instead of, while the VMs will give you auto scale, if the app tier is not capable of scaling that fast, you don't want to get rid of those requests coming in. So a buffering technique where you are managing it as a queue, maybe via Kafka or something else, where maybe a user will face delay in response, but he will get the response. I think that is also something that is worth checking and worth evaluating from the architecture side. So let me take a pause here. I think that's all I sort of wanted to put the thoughts on the table before we start to go to the actual conversation and discussion point, folks. And yeah, thanks for listening in, and all open for any questions and queries post the conversation as well. So with that, let me sort of give it back to maybe Manip or Bhaskar.
Yeah.
And Shalaka.
Yeah, but Bhaskar, you want to say
Benil, shall we open for questions now?
Yeah, so what we thought was that there are two ways in which we can look at it. So we have some seed questions, to the participants. So when I say that, it's all about sharing ideas and sharing experiences, right? So I thought I'll start with one of them. So we would like to take the participants' thoughts and views about how the digital push is actually impacting the overall say digital strategy and implementations. So when I say that are there DR specific budgets being allocated, and are you seeing that increasing or shrinking, or or in terms of with the larger digital push, is there DR becoming, or DR coverage is increasing for you, or do you see that as not the case, because with the digital means it is modern applications, and if you're going with modern architectures, it is highly resilient, distributed, or per se the continuity or the DR aspect is already built into that one. So, maybe there is no need for building specific DR solutions. So we would like to understand from few of the participants. So if I may start with say Mr. Marson from Fidelity, will you be able to tell us how digital push is actually changing your DR strategies in your organizations? So then potentially we can talk to others also from different industries.
That's a good question, Benil. I think wonderful. First of all, thanks for inviting us to this wonderful event and good insights, I would say. Definitely, I want to appreciate all the speakers and all the participants here. I think. Sorry.
It's getting the echo.
Are you getting an echo?
People, those who are not talking, please go on mute.
Okay, it's better now?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Great. I think I just joined Fidelity 5 months back, as a head of the cloud. But prior to that, I was in Barclays, was totally focusing on this, the cloud adoption and everything. So I know, when it comes to the business continuity and in this digital era, how the disaster recovery plays a vital role. There is no definite answer. I would say people follow the different models. A good example, I would say I want to start with a scenario. What happened in the last November, the Amazon, the Kinesis event. So till the time, everyone, in the company and everyone, we felt the applications are resilient. We have a good disaster recovery kind of a models. But what it has opened a Pandora of avenues. For example, when Kinesis went down, though some of the applications which are not using Kinesis, still it has an impacted some of the applications critically. They are tier 0 or tier 1. The main reason is Kinesis was also hosted in the AWS in a shared services where it is impacted the CloudWatch, one of the CloudWatch event. Now, when people, so for example, some applications which are using auto scaling through the CloudWatch has directly impacted with that. So though we see it's green light, there is no data center issue, but when the vendor itself has an issue, how can the applications can survive actually? So in this digital era, I think it was impacted so many applications and also so much of business. Though they had a well defined models. So for us, actually, what we our thought process was more about to understand that dependency matrix is very important actually. Not just for your applications, but even for the CSPs, how their applications are behaving. So our focus was previously always our application has to be resilient. It has to be HA and fault tolerant. But at sometimes CSP can go down. CSP has regional failures. So it all boils down about your architecture. So what is your tier 0 architecture says? What is your RTO and RPO? Whether you have to be in a multi-region or just in one single region with a multi-AZs. So that has opened up a big debate and discussion points. So we are not saying we are there, but this has given a good understanding point.
Thank you.
I know, go ahead.
Thanks for that. Anyone else would like to volunteer, maybe a point of view on this, folks?
Yeah, basically how the digital pushes,
Changing.
Changing the way how you're looking at disaster recovery.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Naveen, right? I'm from Conduent. So what's happening is there are a couple of things that are digital push, right? So what's happening with that is a lot of the companies, right? They want to launch products much faster, right? With that, they're developing products at that such a phase, right? So it's called minimum viable product, right, that they launch. So security is almost given very less importance, right, when they launch product, especially mobile handheld applications, right? You've heard of a lot of places where the user data is stolen, right? And then on came the COVID, and then there was a set off, and most of the population started working from home, right? What happened is 20% of the businesses got impacted because of this, right? So there was an attack on 30% of the businesses just because people are working from home, their home network was exposed. So disaster recovery, right, and setup became inevitable, right? Because it takes like on an average, right? So the days lost because of a cyber attack disaster is about 50 days today, right? So you have to have a switchover, you have to cut off, and then you have to switch over to a DR site, right? So it became very, very inevitable, right? To add to that, right, we have Internet of Things that are connected, which are streaming data all the time, which by themselves are insecure, right? The next one is like streaming audio data and all that, right? If you look at all the video and audio streaming that's happening nowadays, right? So like think of Teams, think of Zoom, right? And then you have on top of it, we have additional video cameras and all of that, that's streaming tons of data, right? So you don't know who is hooking into that stream and then sending malware, right? You don't know where it's going to attack, right? So I think with cloud, moving to cloud, right? So we'll give a cutting edge advantage, right? In terms of how you set up disaster recovery. One is cost effective, right? And then ease of simple of setup. Like for example, we were mentioning about a scale set, right? It's much easier to set up, right? You set up a scale in Azure West and Azure East or Central US, right? You have a full coverage, right? That's given. So when we move to PaaS services, right, platform as a service, that we spoke about infrastructure as a service, right? When we move to platform as a service, it's even more resilient, right? You don't get billed until it gets used, right, or consumed. For example, let us look at Synapse Analytics. Let us look at like Azure Analysis Services, right? All of this is like you can set it as highly available. I mean, even storage account for that matter, right? You have like zone redundancy. You have you have up to content delivery network, which is a global replication of data, right? You can access it anywhere. So that's where the impact is, and that's how the challenges, and that's how the cloud has been able to evolve to cover all of them.
So yeah, thank you, Naveen. Rishi, you wanted to go next, right? You're on mute.
Yeah. Hey guys, great discussion so far. So yeah, I represent Tesco, and now being with Tesco for last 4 years and being part of their digital transformation journey. So yeah, when I joined the company 4 years back, we were not on cloud, and it was the old ways of doing the DRs, where you take the backups and you push those backups to bank. It goes into the drives, it goes into multiple banks, huge cost. And if something goes bad and you need to get the data back, you get 1 week worth of information lost. So seen those days. And from there, we started looking into that, what is the way to better it. So I'm keeping it very DR focused because the discussion is towards that. And the first step was, okay, put a team in place. So we talked about investment in the DR process, that how serious companies are about it. So Tesco being very serious about it, the investment in the committee was done, a plan was rolled out, and a massive drive was done. I'll tell you, there are thousands of APIs that we have. And some of them are tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. There is no knowledge about them. Who even owns them? Some of these machines, a lot of machines, as she was talking about earlier. If you don't know those machines, then how would you go and provide DRs for them, right? So a huge investment. And that's where I started thinking that, are there companies out there which are taking DR as a service or DR as a product seriously and entering into the market? I do understand what was presented, especially Shalaka presented about the Azure, which is, I understand the CAP theorem, I understand the high availability part of it, I understand the how we scale regional, but these are now given, right? If you look at any cloud providers, this is given, this is by default out there in the native cloud, you can do always. So now how do you enable the DR as a process which requires you to identify which of your systems should be tier 1. How will you get and mark those systems? And then how will you put a DR around that? So we went through that exercise, and then 2 parts to that. One is data, other is code. For the code, as Shalaka said, yes, containerization, use Azure, containerize, put the containers there, and then you could scale out. For the data, of course, use Azure replicated data services. So, so we did that. But somebody talked about the, what if the entire, because of the Kinesis service, system goes down, the entire company's system goes down, then what do you do? So in Tesco, then we decided that we should have our own data center, and we should also have cloud. So that's a hybrid strategy to solve that, where you scale out in a hybrid way, both data and code. But we have challenges, and I want to bring those challenges forward and see if anybody wants to comment on it. The challenge is, okay, you have taken care of the code and the data, which is not on mainframe, which you can convert into microservices. But what about the data which are on the systems like mainframes? How do we solve that problem? And then again, it goes into another one of the things that verticalization of the industry, we talked about as one point there. So I want to understand how some of you are solving the problem of mainframe kind of data where terabytes of data is there, and now you want to do a DR for it. How Microsoft can help me solve that? That's the question I have. Thank you, guys.
Hey, Rishi, thank you so much. And you have touched the sweet spot here. I come here from IBM, was managing mainframe business, and now in Azure world, right? So
wonderful.
You have, so I mean, connect with me offline and we will take the conversation. But Microsoft does have mainframe migration as one of the key play. And we have been testing success in lot of verticals as well as lot of geographies. The approach is really 2-3-fold. One is giving you a virtual environment which is mainframe compliant on cloud, so that at least in the first go, your test dev, everything can move. And like IBM also gives you x86 compatible test dev environment, I think, on as a software, which you can also deploy on Microsoft. There is also companies like Raincode, who sort of give you an ability to run a micro environment of System Z on x86. So you could do a lift and shift. Your next phase is really to break the application. So there are some partners who specialize in breaking a COBOL code and modernizing that. That can be your phase 2 of the journey. And then we can sort of support you through that entire life cycle. So it's very structured approach that we have put up with some specific solutions that can help you along the journey to really migrate the mainframe data and application code into cloud. There is another option, because you touched a very interesting point here of hybrid cloud. If you want to retain production workload on mainframe, and if you only want to modernize the data, because now the data is on mainframe, which you may not be able to move that easily, but you still want reporting, analytics, AI running on top, there is also methodology by which we can port the mainframe data using the common data models into the Azure and Synapse platform. And Synapse now integrates with Power BI. So you could actually have a good visualization coming up on the platform itself, right? So we have all of that clearly laid out. Reach out to me and happy to engage, Rishi. And that really brings me to a very interesting point, folks. Just wanted to throw the question here and see whether you have, because the point that I think Maha and Rishi and Sarvan and all of you made was really about, while we have a DR practice and we have the strategy in place, the process seems to be becoming a challenge. And so I'm just trying to understand how you guys are going about automating your runbook. What is your hook? Where is the decision point? And then how are you deciding which applications or which application clusters should sort of do call a failover at what points and what kind of failure. So whether, taking a call on for this much time, if the service is down, I rather keep it down than calling a DR, versus beyond this point, downtime really gives me larger business impact than me going to DR and probably losing some of the data. So I'm just trying to understand, how are you going about taking that decision and how are you automating it?
Yeah,
This is,
so go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Ravi.
yeah, this is Ravi Ketna from CAMS. See, the disaster recovery. See, this is one more thing which we need to think through is the paradigm change. See, there's nothing to recover here. What we need to do is disaster can happen at any point of time. Why do we need a idle resources that is sitting in the disaster recovery? So the distributed environment is the norm that we really need to look at it. Say, except the database layer and everything else you can run from everywhere else. So if you can optimize the resources and put into the, whether you say far DR, near DR, there may be some regulations, you may need to do those things in city, outside city and all. Then basically databases probably can keep it one place. Then the your time for you to recover and time for you to up and running is going to be very, very minimal. Because if there is an issue in the some places in some parts of the country, I can still do it in other place. But only thing is data. One more strategy which really need to look at is the write once and read in many places. Say most of the services, I can say I can go down, but there are a lot of services I can still run with a read-only copies on that side. See, what if you run the services in non-stop basis, where I may not provide the immediate support for a write transactions, but I can always do a read transactions on that one. So it is very important for you to distribute the workloads across the region so that it is cost effective. So I'm not putting any idle workloads anywhere else. And second thing is some of these users, they will be able to wait for something, but they cannot wait for it without any information, so that my services are never stopped on that one. And third thing is, see, the concept of migration. So you only move from one place to the other place, and the ability for you to leverage the potential of the new technologies is very minimal when you do a migration path. So it may give you a little bit more incremental change, but if you really need to look for a major change the way you want to service your customer or convert to digital, so you have to go for a revamp. Because see, screen scraping is old days of 30 to 70 data streams. Now I say I build the new screens, but I still go and do it. See, those won't give you any major customer experience on that one. What is really required is a re-architect the entire thing and start doing is see, microservices per se, I can call a API as a microservices, but if you don't build it the way it's supposed to build it, you will never realize a benefit of that part. So it is very critical for you to think through as a combination of availability and making sure that I write one place but read it many places. So that puts a lot of stress on your application programmers. So application programmers have to be looking at the multiple places to find where I need to pick it up. So that has to go into the design. And the last but not the least is don't migrate it. So it has to be very important to rebuild those things over a period of time so that I reap the benefit of full cloud native applications.
Thanks for that, Ravi. You touched a very important point, right? That
Yeah.
cloud native development has to be part of the plan when you migrate to cloud.
And Shalaka, there was one point that Rishi touched upon, saying that industry alignment. So that is a key aspect that I would like to ask the participants, saying that do you think that disaster recovery should be industry aligned, or the industry alignment comes through the kind of applications and regulations that you have, and hence it is called industry aligned, or is there a real business alignment for disaster recovery strategies and kind of technologies that you use? Is there anyone who would be able to discuss that from your industry perspective, saying that, industry alignment is important and the reason is 1, 2, 3, 4? Is there anyone who would be able to?
Yes, Binel, this is Saravanan from Bhavan Cybertech. The industry alignment for DR is very crucial. So I work for the point of sale industry, the G-Money, Synchrony Financials. What they will do is the point of sale machine, the criticality, the milliseconds of response is very crucial for them. So in that case, the system can't go down for even a fraction of seconds or fraction of milliseconds. So they have the multiple redundancy built for it, and depends on type of the application, criticality of the application, and also on the business. So mostly finance related application or finance related ERP, definitely it has to be on the higher layer. Shalaka was telling about the 5 nines or the level of architecture resilience. That is what they prefer. Fundamentally, for any banking industry, for that matter, India or anywhere across the globe, they will look for that kind of architecture, because they can't go down even during the business hours. For even they might have that database on the other availability zones that need to be up, and they need to cater because of the globalization. They have branches across the globe, and the system has to be up. For that matter, for our ERP application, it has to be up all the time, because we have Brunei till to Santa Clara. The officers are there; they will be using the systems, and across the different time zones. So definitely, finance-related industry, it warrants the 5 nines of availability, and that it not only on the high available architecture with the disaster.
Yeah, I can kind of talk to that. Shrikant from Goldman Sachs. Just a brief about me, I'm part of the core engineering group within Goldman Sachs. I'm a technology fellow, and I've been working on developing trading systems for equities, multi-asset for last 14 years. And now I'm responsible for the cloud enablement, API platform, and developer experience within core engineering. And just to kind of talk to that, within Goldman Sachs, Stephen Sherafar, who's our CFO, and last November in the Bank of America Merrill conference kind of spoke about our Goldman Sachs strategy, and innovative engineering is at the core of our strategy in there. And what we really mean by that is we design platforms from really a client perspective while driving our business growth and operational efficiency. So the way we are thinking about this is that we have products which are we have a credit card product, we have a completely digital bank, we provide APIs for our clients to trade with us. We have transaction banking business for payments, and all of these are global businesses, which pretty much a lot of these run 24/7, and we have customers who are using these. Now, when we are thinking about these, how is this going to be part of our strategy? So we are thinking about having these as platforms, and then these are going to be cloud-based, API-driven to really enhance the client experience, drive revenue growth, and really optimize all of our efficiencies in there. And the way we are looking at this is to really build it on cloud and really take into cloud all the things that it provides. And for us, thinking about this disaster recovery is not a point in time where we need to really think about, but really in terms of everything that we do, how do we really think about providing that resiliency, that efficiency, that availability? How do we really design that and really look at for each of our businesses for which, for example, we have a banking customer, it's not a good experience for any of us to, when we use our mobile or any of our applications for a service to be down. Similarly for payments, for corporations, where we do that. And what we really think about in this aspect is really from, right from, having cloud native development, deployment, even our CI/CD infrastructure being in multiple regions, doing our deployments across multiple availability zones, across different regions. And when we think about SLIs and SLOs and the SLA, there is a cost associated. You want 3 nines, 4 nines, and what you really need to achieve with that. And all of that really factors in. And from a failover perspective, we really think about global, regional, multi-region failovers, failing over from Americas to EMEA. And what does that really mean? Both from an application as well as data perspective in terms of database failover, what is it that really means? And this can get more complex with respect to transactions and how we need to handle that. Also, a lot of these are, something that is just driven by the business, and unless we have this as a, key aspect, to drive customer experience that directly points to growing the revenues. And the other aspect is regulations, where each of the different markets that we really operate in drive regulations, and we are bound to really produce, or as Shalaka alluded to earlier, a lot of compliance reports, regulatory reports, and also prove to our regulators that we have an operational resiliency plan, both in terms of all of our systems and how we operate in case of outages, be it on multiple levels, right from systems to country to regions to people. And we think about and design all of these right from the way we architect our systems and go cloud native.
Yeah, good thoughts, I think.
I want to
Shrikant.
I want to add to what Shrikant was saying and quantify it with an example. When we say the vertical segment, right, we are saying, okay, DR, and can there be solutions which are vertical in nature? One example is in Welsh countries, you cannot sell alcohol below certain price. Now, it's a legislation there. If you do that, your license is gone. Now, is there a service which understands these government policies and exposes them as a DR service? Because now you need the data of the products, especially alcohol, and tell them I cannot sell it below this price. So you need to save that data over the period of years and see how the policy changes are impacting that. Now, if that can be exposed as a service, many companies will use it, because they all want, whoever in the retail, and they want to sell something there, and this service is useful for them. So DR as a service for a specific segment, this is in particular example, is useful. But I don't see any initiatives in that direction. What we see that DR as a journal service, which is more like a high available systems. We have to differentiate these two.
Yeah, it's more of technology rather than the business alignment directly exposed by, say, hyperscalers as a service, right? And that's what you're trying to allude to. It's I think just my point of view, 2 cents. So that is where people or providers also play to their strength, right? I mean, so for example, Azure, their job is to provide that all-encompassing technology, powerful technology made available to the world. Now there are service providers, for example, maybe like us, or maybe like Cybertech, or who will build services on top of it which are aligned to industries. That is where the partners come into play. So we do, I'm sure that many of the partners of Microsoft, including Michael, and we have services which are specifically workload aligned. So some are workload aligned because it is not necessarily industry, but same, say, databases used across. So now how do you build services specifically for database disaster recovery or certain kind of applications? That's why I said, SAP. So now you want to have services which are specifically aligned to, SAP's disaster recovery. Or like you said, if somebody brings in industrial and or not, but for legacy applications.
Yeah.
So application aware or workload aware disaster recovery services, that is something that, I'm sure that many service providers, including Michael, and build and help our customers with that one. So that is one point. And the point that you made is also pretty important, saying that if there are business regulation aware disaster recovery services are available, that will be great. So that's a good input for. I'm sure that there are many service providers are also on the call. That will be a good input for all of us to look at how do we help our customers with such services, and we will definitely build on top of it. So I'll ask another question that I would want to ask the team is that, how much you all do testing? How confident are you about your disaster recovery solutions put in place? Are you confident to run modern chaos engineering on top of your workloads to say that, I will go shut it down randomly? Okay. So are there anyone on the call who are adopting this in your organization? Maybe not necessarily you as an individual, but in your organizations elsewhere, Americas or anywhere, or any part of your workloads. Do you guys or any of the people on the call, your companies are adopted chaos engineering or any such models to test your application disaster recovery strength and confidence?
Not chaos engineering exactly, but very close to it. So what we do is in Tesco, every 3 months, because continuously we are decommissioning the mainframes, we are continuously building new microservices, we are continuously deploying to production. So we believe that 3 months is a good time to see that we have built enough, and now we need to build all the system down in production and to see if our fail, like I talked about, we have hybrid models, we have our own data centers. Are we able to take the load there? And while we bring the services back on the agreed SLA, so we have 4 tiers of services defined. The first tier needs to come between 1 to 4 hours, then second tier between 4 to 8 hours, and third tier between 1 week, and then fourth tier after 1 week, something like that we have specified. So we turn off the systems and then we test it every 3 months to see whether it is happening or not. And also you touched upon the automation part, where I see the process is largely requires more automation. We are not yet there. But bringing these systems down and up is highly automated, thanks to Azure. They provide a lot of tools for automation and we use them, so that helps.
Yeah, anybody else with any points?
Yeah, I mean, I think chaos engineering is, one of the things that we really put in as a practice is, as part of our CI/CD pipeline or any of these changes that we're doing, how do we really inject tests where we simulate, for example, a service is taking more time? How do you kill a database? How do you kill certain systems and observe what the behavior is? So essentially build a set of chaos tests that we would really have it in there and look at, injecting failures and how that behaves. Now, having said that, for systems or platforms to get to that maturity, now, go and just kill something to really get started with that in production. And where we are really raising the bar is to really get that into us as part of how we do our development, build, testing, deployment, canary deployment, and really having all of these done it in QA, get the confidence level, and then start to run some of these chaos tests eventually in production. But going with cloud, going with having this resiliency with the application and the whole platform behavior, that's going to be a very key part of how to design and architect systems in cloud native solutions.
I think a second, Srikanth here. Sorry, Ravi, you want to go?
I think
See,
one of the key things which we need to remember is that, technology can take to some extent, but what is we should learn is learn from the other industries. See, for example, if we take software industry, we don't talk about reliability because we keep building the applications assemble set. The parts come from, because that is the mantra, because they can give you reliability. So in the similar fashion, when we come to the software, why can't we use a large number of APIs? Write once and test multiple times on that. Then you bring a little bit of a assembly mode where you use some frameworks and same standard DevSecOps, and if you use event-driven architectures and all. So your reliability per se will improve. Once you improve the reliability per se, then your disaster recovery solutions will be a lot more simpler. Otherwise, to compensate for some of the inefficiencies in the applications, then you make your DR solution very complicated on that. So some lessons from the manufacturing industry: bring a lot of assembly rather than doing a build for every time, and do a lot of testing for the services and use some frameworks, and don't go for a tiered architectures, go for a completely event-driven architectures. See, that should give us the some of the major relief from what are the problems that were bogging down the industry for a long time.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, I think the entire so-called API economy was supposed to help with something like that. wherein every service provider's job is to, create those APIs and expose them, which is unlimited scalability. And, so that what you have is that you have a collective disaster recovery enabled, rather than me building disaster recovery for every element that I build. Each provider who's building their, for example, Azure exposes thousands of APIs, right? So they have figured out how to make that highly available for you. So likewise, if business service elements, digital elements are available as APIs, and wherein the business organization's job is to put them together in a unique way, so that it is it differentiates themselves. So ultimately, the differentiator has to come. If it is all parts by everyone, and if I'm not able to differentiate, it becomes an issue, right? So that differentiation is what I will build and maintain as an organization, but all the parts should come from my partners, like you said. It's a good thought, in fact. I think there's a lot to learn from other industries which are matured over a period.
Yeah, just take it from a Nike type of organizations. They only do the design. Entire manufacturing is outsourced to someone else on that. So they don't really bother about how each part is made and how each part is prepared and done. They only look at the end result. So in the similar fashion, so once I have control the design, but I can buy the lot of parts from the various service providers and then assembly and put it. So my end product will be a lot more reliable. And I can also give you a 99 point, what are the number? See, I can't give for an API. I can only guess. I can give for my VM, or I can give for my hypervisor, or whatever it is you look at it. But for my application, if I can give those numbers, that's where is the digital experience comes in. Because today the consumer will not like to say that I will only give you till 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. But somebody wakes up in the night, they also want to do it. So from that perspective, is a bulletproof APIs that built and tested once and later only assembled, and people differentiate by the way they present it to the end customer. That makes the real differentiator. And second thing is the platforms. We always say platform is my IP, but one thing that makes our services a lot more resilient is why don't you open our platform to the others to come and build a extension to it. See, for example, if you see some other countries, when you walk in, if I need to pay my credit card bill, if I want to pay my bill in the restaurant, if our 4 friends go in Western countries, everybody pays their own bills. I don't need to pay 4 times on that one. One time I can take a swipe it, and all of us can split that one. A lot of those extensions, a lot of service providers do it. Whereas we control the major platform, but I don't dictate each and everything that goes on the platform. So that is another way of making sure that we also talked about disaster recovery as a service. I can do it at one place, but a lot of service providers can use my platform to offer the services. That is another paradigm change. I think that really helps us to provide a non-stop service.
Sure. I think good thoughts, Ravi. Moy, I think you wanted to make a point, right?
I think Srikanth and Ravi are touched base on the same things. Okay, the other angle which we are looking more into it depends upon the business to business and the kind of a tier rating, where whether you're tier 0 or tier 1 application, depends, right? But we also follow something like, okay, automation is there, and we have also like what you call like the chaos engineering. We are trying to adopt, actually not into the production, but like, okay, in the blue-green deployments. But the other one we also follow is like the continuous, the COB model also, okay? Wherein like, okay, we ask all the tier 0 or tier 1 where the RTO and RPO is very small, make sure like, okay, every month or 2 months, okay, they do have production crossover, okay, which means they are testing the DR site, okay, vigorously. And okay, if there is any major disruptions, like, okay, that's already taken care, okay? So it forces all the teams to have a actually trusted failover procedure. So that is one of the strategy we follow. Just want to share that.
But I think we probably have, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead, Shalaka.
Yeah, so no, I was saying we are just keeping time here, folks. Probably we do one round of question before we sort of hand over. And I just sort of wanted to build upon what Srikanth said, and again what Ravi alluded to in terms of building this API economy and really the composable service metrics, right? So while we do that, I think there is now a lot of exposure that all the platform and the applications carry in terms of exposing to multiple people and multiple other channels, even for your P2P or your own ecosystem collaborators. So just wondering whether you are seeing or sensing that the threat landscape, as in the traditional attack exposure versus what you are now seeing in the digital economy, is it changing? And what are the steps that you are additionally taking to sort of safeguard yourself?
Yeah, I think threat landscape, I think see, a lot of people say COVID they created, but it's not. It's actually problems are always there. It was accentuated during the COVID time because work from home was always there, but it was never open to the everyone. But now we've opened to everyone. That's where we see a lot of other issues on that. And the simple things works out. I think someone also just talked about, see, zero trust networks is a very, very important part of that. And second thing is touch base on your edge. And one of the very simple thing that works very well is don't use any public networks or don't use any of the shared networks, tethering and all. That will solve a lot of problems on that. And definitely this VAPT of as if there is no tomorrow is one thing which we should all do it. So with that one, the prevention is taken care. Then you can also get onto the detection mode. But problem with the detection mode is that you get so many alerts. If you don't act on that, it's of no use on that. So there are some tools that are coming up from all the providers. I think that also should help us to address this problem.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So just maybe one last question. After that, we'll summarize. We got about 4 minutes, is what I see. As end user organizations, I think we have end user organizations as well as.
Yeah, Benil, I think Shrikant wanted to say something.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
Just to add, when we are going for cloud adoption, I think security is like the number one thing on how to really have all the guardrails for the kind of systems, data that's being put in there. And it's really looking at what are the different attack vectors and how do we really guard against that? What are the best practices around the OWASP top 10, the DDoS, or all of the security principles? How do we really have that at all of our edge? And also, when you have connectivity to on-prem, how do you really guard against all of those? That's a very key aspect. And I think one of the key things is, how do you model these threats for all of your systems, have threat modeling, and really look at, one of the key aspects is how can we have threat modeling as a software artifact with which this can be constantly evaluated with what was intended to be the system architecture and the landscape versus what it actually is, what are the gaps, and how to really highlight the rest. So that's I think solving that and getting a good headway to that, I think in general will really speed up the cloud adoption and get that comfort level.
Yeah, I think as the investment in DRs has gone up, same way the investment in security also has gone up. And part of that goes towards the DR, the part of that goes into the various other security violations that we were talking about. So yeah, both are very important.
And one more thing is very important is the benchmarking. See, we always say we will do this, we will do that. But what is a gold standard? So there are some measurements. If you go for software, there are some measurements. In the security side, there are some measurements like BitSights and all. In the similar fashion, probably we may need to look at it is how do we measure my effectiveness of a disaster recovery? Maybe some standards that needs to come out.
So basically, you need to handle two sides. One is that you have to manage possibly the threats and also manage your recovery. So when you say disaster recovery, you need to also look at how to avoid my threats getting materialized. So for that, there are certain things that you need to do. And certain things is all about, once it materializes, how do I recover fast and continue my services and then get back to normalcy. So absolutely right. And so I think we have about 2 minutes. So a couple of points that I, realized or maybe gathered from this, that one is definitely, people are looking for industry alignment. So industry alignment is critical, and expecting service providers to bring in services which are industry aligned, that will be of great help. Another one that we touched upon was specifically on the services which are helping legacy workloads to have disaster recovery, whether it's mainframe or any other legacy workloads that you would have. Another thing is about architecture. So architectures play the most important aspect in doing or bringing the modern I would say disaster recovery useful. When I say that cloud is there, but that doesn't mean that you are going to have a disaster recovery by default. Unless you build your application and change them into the right architecture, it's not going to really help. Another thing that we brought up was how do we learn from the manufacturing industry or any of those industries which would have mostly providing that API kind of a model wherein each API provider takes care of the disaster recovery and availability of that. So your possibility of disaster itself is reducing in that way, or it gets distributed, the management of a disaster itself. Another thing that we spoke about the zero trust network or the securing the edge or the modeling. So I think some of those aspects that we said were really useful. So is there? I think we are on the time now. So Shalaka or anybody, if there is nothing much, I'll hand it over to back to Bhaskar. Bhaskar, you're there.
Let me just thank everyone, folks. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Very active participation. I
on a
really
Friday
learned,
evening, that too.
Yeah.
Great session.
Really learned a lot, folks, from all of you, and very excited to see some of you using technology so proactively and some of you being on the path. Really appreciate the trust, the partnership, the business, and I really like the way you are bringing all of this alive in each of your industries and use cases. So thank you so much. And
thanks
for
to
the
our silent participants as well, because I'm sure that they've also it's a learning for them, and thanks for listening in. Listening in is also
good contribution.
Great skill, in fact. Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye. Have a nice weekend.